All right, let's talk about the Gupta Empire. It's a period in Indian history that gets slapped with this one really shiny label. Yep, the Golden Age. You hear that and you immediately think, peace, prosperity, incredible art, all that good stuff. And look, to be fair, the cultural achievements of this era, they were absolutely astounding. But is it ever that simple? That label, Golden Age, can kind of hide what's really going on underneath. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to peel back that label and look at the actual blueprint. What did it really take to build this thing from the ground up? Okay, so where do you start? Well, just like building a house, you have to start with the foundation. For any great civilization, that foundation is the land. I mean, you don't get fancy temples and amazing poetry until people are fed, right? You need a solid agricultural base first. And boy, did the Guptas have that. We're not just talking about growing enough food to get by. Their farming was super diverse. Yeah, they had the basics, cereals, vegetables, but they also grew really important cash crops, things like cotton and sugarcane. And that is what's going to fuel the whole economic engine. And here's where it gets really cool, the tech they used. This wasn't just, waiting for the rain to fall. They had advanced irrigation systems. Take the Gadiantra, for example. It's basically this clever water wheel with a chain of pots on it. It just continuously pulls water up from a well. Think about what that means for a super thirsty crop like sugarcane. It's a total game changer. So you've got all this extra food and cotton being grown. How does that build an empire? Simple. Taxes. The government's main source of cash was a tax on the land. They typically take about 1/6 of whatever was produced. That steady stream of income, that's the fuel for everything else we're going to talk about. Okay, but here's where we start to see the first crack in that shiny golden image. If you were just a regular farmer, life was tough, really tough. It wasn't just the taxes. You often had to do forced, unpaid labor for the state. It was called vishti. So yeah, the whole foundation of this empire, it was resting right on their shoulders. So we've got the raw materials coming from the farms. Now what? Well, let's follow that stuff as it gets turned into finished goods in the cities. That agricultural base is what made a whole world of crafts and trade possible.
And the stuff they made? Wow, it was just an incredible range of things. Everything from your basic pottery for everyday use, all the way up to stunning luxury goods. We're talking ivory carvings, superfine textiles, and this incredibly detailed jewelry from gold, silver, and gems. It just tells you how skilled their artisans were. Now, this wasn't some kind of chaotic marketplace. No way. It was super organized. And the key to that organization was something called the shreni, which you can think of as a guild. These were powerful groups of craftsmen or merchants. They had their own rules, the state protected them, and they pretty much ran their own shows, managing their specific industries.
And this was real money economy, super dynamic. The Guptas were minting gold, silver, and copper coins to make all this trade happen. And get this, the merchants weren't just some guys in the background. They were major players, super influential people who often had top jobs in the city government. All right, so let's recap. We've got a booming farm economy and a buzzing trade network. How on earth do you keep all that running smoothly? You need a really good system for managing it all. You need an organized government. And sitting at the very top of that system, no surprise, is the king. But the Gupta kings didn't just want to be seen as rulers. They wanted to be seen as almost godlike. They took on these huge epic titles like Paramapacharaka, the most worshipful, and Chakravarti, which means universal ruler. The king was meant to be the sun, and everything revolved around him. But of course, one guy can't run an entire empire by himself. So they had this really organized, layered system. You had the whole empire, which was broken down into provinces, or buktis. Those provinces were then broken down into districts, the vishyas, and all the way down at the bottom, you have the individual village with its own leader. Super clear, top-down structure. But here's a really fascinating twist. It wasn't just top-down. When you get to the district level, the government actually brought in important local people. The heads of the merchant guilds, the leaders of the big trade caravans, the chief artisans, they were all part of the local government. It's actually a pretty smart, practical system, right? You bring the people with the economic power right into the government. So you've got a stable food supply, you've got a booming economy, and you've got a government that works. What happens when you have all that? Well, you get the breathing room for culture to just explode. This is the part of the blueprint that really earns the empire that famous Golden Age title. And a huge piece of that cultural explosion was language, specifically what we call classical Sanskrit. The Gupta court basically championed it, making it the official language for everything important: government records, inscriptions, and, of course, for writing some of the most incredible literature the world has ever seen. Seriously, the people living and working at this time were just on another level. This is just a tiny sample. You've got Kalidasa, his plays are still considered masterpieces today. And then you've got scientists like Aryabhata and Varhamihira. These guys were making huge leaps in math and astronomy, figuring out how long a year is with incredible accuracy, even developing theories about gravity. Just wow. And all that creative energy wasn't just in books and ideas. You can see it in stone and brick. The Gupta era is basically when the Hindu temple as a standalone building was born. Before this, you saw a lot of temples carved into rock faces. But this is when they started building them from the ground up, like the gorgeous Dashavatara temple at Deogarh. They were literally setting the blueprint for centuries of Indian architecture to come. Okay, so the blueprint looks pretty good, right? Wealth, power, incredible culture. It seems like we've got the whole picture. But to really get it, to really understand this golden age, we have to look at the social pyramid. What was life actually like for everybody inside this system? So the official version of society, the ideal they were pushing, was this four-part system called the Varna system. Think of it like a pyramid. At the very top, you have the Brahmanas, the priests, then the Kshatriyas, who were the warriors. Below them, the Vaishyas, merchants and farmers. And at the bottom of the pyramid were the Shudras, the laborers. And it was the government's job to make sure everyone stayed in their lane. But here's the thing. That neat pyramid on paper, it wasn't the reality on the ground, not even close. For starters, that four-part system just left people out. Entire groups of people, the anti-Jayas or untouchables, were considered so impure they weren't even on the pyramid. They were completely outside of it. And then you have women, literally half the population, whose social status was just incredibly low across the board. This quote really says it all, and it's pretty chilling. It basically says that women, it didn't matter what their family's social standing was, were, for all practical reasons, to be of the same category as the Shudras, the lowest category. Their rights, their freedom, it was all extremely limited. So the big takeaway here is that the golden light of this golden age, it definitely did not shine on everyone. And that brings us back to our big question. When we call something a golden age, what do we actually mean? Are we defining it by its absolute highest points, the genius of a poet like Kalidasa, the beauty of a temple? Or should we define it by the daily life of the person at the bottom, the farmer doing forced labor, or the woman who is considered last in line? The thing is, the Gupta Empire is both of these stories at the same time. And that contradiction, that's what makes it so important and so fascinating to study.